Okay. All right. So, um, with that, we don't punish the people who come on time. We're going to get started. So, our question, this is the second in our series of Megillat Esther, not really a children's book. And last time we spent a little bit of time just sort of putting the context together. The talked about the argument between the work in the period of the Talmud, more or less, which is called Seder Olam Rabbah, which put Achashverosh in a certain time period, and then there was another scholar, Azaria de Rossi, who puts Achashverosh in a different time period. And we're going to look right now at what that time period was and why is that significant. And first, we're going to sort of see that even the text of the Bible tells us this. This is from Isaiah chapter 45. Now, Isaiah lives um, before Cyrus the Great. Although there is a theory that some of the Rishonim put out there, some of the commentators put out there, that there was really a school of Isaiah. It's not just one Isaiah, but there are many Isaiahs. And that, so Isaiah has sort of two parts. One is clearly in the period of the Assyrians, let's say around 750 BCE, and Cyrus the Great is in the 5th century BCE. So it's easily 200 years in between them. But this is an incontrovertible statement of the book of Isaiah. So said God to his anointed, to Koresh, that's Cyrus. Asher chzakti bimino larad lefanav goyim. Right, so that Koresh's Koresh's job, he's been given the job of tearing down nations, of ungirding the loins of kings and opening the doors before him and letting no gate stay shut. What does Koresh do? He is going to take down the Babylonians, right? So he is the beginning of the Persian Empire. And so we, at this point, before you have any other Persian, the first of the Persians is going to be Cyrus the Great. And one of the things that Cyrus the Great does, and here you have this image of the cylinder of Cyrus the Great, which you can find in the British Museum and perhaps other places, which declares the fact that Jews can go back to their homeland and rebuild their temple. Um, okay, so that's perhaps a little bit more interesting for us is in the book of Ezra. The book of Ezra, which is which is the book that describes the return of the Jews to Israel. It gives us the lineage of these kings in order. So first is King Cyrus. After King Cyrus, you have you have Darius, and after Darius, you have Achashverosh. And then after that, you have Artaxerxes. So here, this is just the Hebrew of the same, that you get the Achashverosh that we know and and appreciate. So that he appears also in the book of Esther, and this is the exact lineage of the kings. So that means you have Cyrus, Darius, and Achashverosh, which means that Achashverosh is already living well into the time when the Jews have returned to Israel and are rebuilding the temple. This means that Xerxes, the Persian king that we know from the Greek histories as Xerxes, was in fact Achashverosh. And just as how do you get from Achashverosh to Xerxes? So scholars will tell you that the name is Shayarsha. So this is the best way I can describe this is Hebrew does not like two consonants at the beginning of a word, and so we have a lot of Hebrew speakers have a lot of trouble with that in the classical Hebrew period. It's a little bit like I once had a French Canadian ski instructor who kept talking about the heis, right? And sometimes you'll find um, English people don't talk about H, they talk about H. So sometimes there are certain languages that just difficult for people to start with a consonant. Without a consonant, Hebrew doesn't like two consonants together. So what did Hebrew do? It simply said that we're going to put an aleph before that. It makes it a lot easier for us to pronounce, right? So achash is much easier than chash. So then there is a concept in Hebrew also called otiot mitchalfot. There are letters that switch occasionally. One interesting letter that switches, which is not our subject today, is Nebuchadnezzar is sometimes called Nebuchadrezzar. The nun and the resh switch. Very interesting letters that switch, but there are such letters. So vav and yud are often switch, and so these two letters, the yud in chashayarsha, switches to achashverosh. In the Greek, they don't have a shin sound, which is why King Shaul becomes Saul, and it's why Shlomo becomes Solomon. And
Oh, really? Oh, wow. Didn't
that's
know that.
okay. There you go. Now learn something useful, I guess. So
Every time. Every
that's why
time.
he they can't you there's no letter for them to use for Achashverosh. So
Oh,
they called him Xerxes, right? They couldn't call him Xerxes because they don't have that letter. So this is how the Greeks also had trouble with the chash at the beginning. So they just made it into an X. So that's how you get from Chashayarsha to Achashverosh to Xerxes, but all the same person. And so Xerxes already lives. We're already well into the reconstruction of the temple, which is an important piece of this. And again, this is just again the chronology that we presented last week, just showing you this whole picture um, in context, right? So here you have, the destruction of the temple, Cyrus the Great, right? Darius is the one where rebuilding of the temple commences under him, right? And so he's 522 to 486. Xerxes, which is Achashverosh, is 486 to 465. So we already have there's a temple, there's a community in Jerusalem. There is a Jewish community there, right? Which is interesting because the Megillah does not mention the word Eretz Israel. 127 provinces. We know about India, we know about Ethiopia, right? Kol medina u'benina kichdava va'am va'am kilshono. Every nation in its own language. But do we hear one word about Israel? Not a peep, right? So that's a very interesting piece of this whole Megillah. Just another thing to sort of just put into context what might be missing. There are a number of great battles, but they were great defeats of the Persian forces. So that the Battle of Thermopylae, the Talmud has a whole narrative about Achashverosh and the Battle of Thermopylae. Actually, it's not about Achashverosh; it's about Mordechai and Haman, and it essentially puts the blame on the loss at Thermopylae on Haman. And the Talmud is well aware that there's a Greek battle, and Mordechai was a general. The way that the Talmud understands it is that Mordechai had to lend. Haman used up all of his resources, and he needed to turn to Mordechai to recover and to have resources to be able to maintain his troops. And Haman always had this set of indebtedness to Mordechai, and that's what sort of triggers the tension of the story between Haman and Mordechai. But again, this story is not mentioned in the Megillah, right? So we have a book that really has it it is obfuscates some pieces of the history that we can piece together that exist here. And so you're essentially coming to the Megillah and you're realizing that the Megillah is a very stylized piece that is clearly hiding certain information. Well, in this Jewish document, we don't want to talk about how the king lost the Battle of Thermopylae, right? We don't want to talk about how Xerxes is responsible for defeats where his his grandfather and great grandfather were storied conquerors. And so we have a very different story. We are talking about something else. We spend a lot of time in this talking about the king and his wealth, and we talk about the Jews as very much integrated. into this society, right? They're drinking with Achashverosh. They're drinking with all the people. There's a very strong picture of assimilation amongst the Persian Jews, up into the point where the heroine of the story ultimately becomes the wife of the king, right? Which is almost unthinkable in terms of a book that is a Jewish book that we have this heroine who is fully intermarried. And so again, we feel like the Megillah is a book that has to have a little bit of decoding that goes into it. Now, again, just emphasizing this point, the story of the Megillah takes place after the reconstruction of the temple, yet Jerusalem is only mentioned as a place that once was. So said that the land of Israel wasn't mentioned, but here Jerusalem is only mentioned as the place from which Mordechai once came, where Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had exiled him from. So it 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 it's as if Jerusalem almost doesn't exist, that it remains like the city of Atlantis, as far as the Megillah is concerned. Now, here's where things get very interesting. There is a clear doubling of dates in the Megillah that exist in no other holiday. Um, the date of Pesach is always the same date. It's true that in the diaspora, because we were afraid of the Samaritans hacking the system, so we keep 2 days of Yom Tov where the Israelis keep one. So, but that's just a sort of an accuracy. That's preserving an accuracy in the diaspora. But everybody observes Pesach on the 15th, on the night of the 15th of Nisan, and everybody observes Sukkot on the 15th of Tishrei, and
Right.
everybody observes Shavuot on the 6th of Sivan, right? And everyone observes Hanukkah on the 25th of Kislev. There's absolutely no variability in the Jewish calendar whatsoever, right? All the dates are uniform. Jews are there in the same time. Purim is the only holiday that has 2 days, and its 2 days already are embedded in the Megillah. Now, it's so embedded that sometimes we don't even notice it. But here it says Mordechai recorded these events, and he sent dispatches to all the Jews throughout the provinces of the king of Achashverosh, near and far, charging them to observe the 14th and the 15th days of Adar every year. So what does that sound like? It sounds like Mordechai told them Purim is a 2 day holiday. Purim is a 2 day holiday because it was something that happened in most places on the 14th, and in Shushan happened also on the 15th. And so Mordechai is suggesting that there should be 2 days. There are 2 days of Purim. Now, of course, we only observe one day of Purim. But what you will see is
A
that,
question.
yes,
So maybe back in the Persian Empire, they did like we do in all the countries outside of Israel, do 2 days, and hence Purim also 2 days.
um, so two things.
Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, don't we do 2 days, two
Two
days
things.
all the?
The,
I mean, it started somewhere because it
right,
could
but
have
but
started
that
in Persia.
that decree presumably post dates this. That decree came
Persia?
in after. So that's number one.
Okay, I don't know. Yeah.
Number two. Number two is this. If if the if as you suggest, Annie, that we have this problem of the hacking of the calendar, so in the diaspora you keep 2 days. So it could say in the land of Israel they kept one, but it's saying these days. And throughout you're going to say it's going to talk about these days of Purim. These days, Yemei, in Hebrew it's Yemei HaPurim, these days of Purim, right? You'll see it keeps coming up. Hayamim ha'ela v'yemei ha'purim. Everything is in the plural,
Mhm.
right? So
So, yeah, so it begs the next question: when did it become a custom to do 2 days on all the other holidays, on all the other Rosh Regalim? When did this become customary? Which period in history?
I think that would have been the probably around the time of possibly around maybe slightly after this period of time, right? Once the temple was reestablished in Jerusalem.
So then the Romans around the Roman time?
No, it still might have been in the Persian era, could have been in the era of the Greeks. Um, remember the Greeks, Alexander the Great is going to conquer the Persian Empire.
Yeah.
But even if your suggestion is that everything here is a single day. Or sorry, this is just, the Jewish idea of having 2 days of a holiday.
Yeah.
But one of the things you'll see here is that even the letters that come out are two different letters, right? So you see, "Vayichtov Mordechai et hadvarim ha'ela v'yishlach svarim al kol Yehudim asher b'chol midot hamelech Achashverosh hakrovim b'achrochim." This is the verse we saw
Mhm.
just a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
And Mordechai wrote these events, and he sent dispatches. He sent svarim are scrolls, letters, or books, right? So they call them dispatches here, but that's just a fancy translation. We know what svarim are. Svarim are books. Probably then it wasn't a bound book; it was a scroll. He said the scroll. It's to all these people. So that's Esther 9:20. But there's a second letter. Vatichtov Esther Hamaka et Bat Avichai or Mordechai Yudi et Kol HaTokef. They wrote a second letter, right? For the purpose of confirming with full authority the aforementioned one of Mordechai, right? Ayudi, right? Hazot Shenit, the second one. They send out a second scroll. And the the Talmud, and then again, by the way, it uses the same language. Vayishlach svarim al kol Yehudim, and they sent out scrolls again, right? And again, we're going to see to the 127 provinces of the realm, right? With or with ordinance of equity and honesty, shalom ve'amet. So we see that there's two sets of um, of of books that get sent out, right? And those two books that get sent out seem to refer to these days of Purim. What is, I think, interesting and fascinating about this, and this is what Yoel Bin suggests, the way in which the Talmud understands this is what is Yemei Purim, these 2 days of Purim. Well, there is one day of Purim for the standard, that's the 14th, and there's another day of Purim which is for the walled cities. There's only really one walled city. The definition of a walled city in the Talmud is a city that had a wall at the time of Yoshua bin Nun, the time of Joshua, right?
So did Jerusalem have a wall back in the days of Joshua? I mean, Jerusalem
Yes,
wasn't even
yes, yes.
was
That was a Jebusite city that had a wall.
it was a hick town back then in the Joshua time until
I don't know. It was
King
such a hick
David.
town. David HaMelech did not have such an easy time getting in there.
Mhm. Was Shushan walled?
Yes,
Uh-huh.
but
So
this is
that's where
the
it came
interesting
from.
thing.
That's where it came
You would
from.
think, you would think that the definition should be walled at the time of Achashverosh, but that is not the definition. The definition is walled at the time of Joshua, which essentially means that there was a separate, different day of Purim for Jerusalem. That you might see the fact that there are kind of two different communities here. There are two different realities. There is one reality which is the reality of the land of Israel, and there's another reality which is the reality of the rest of the diaspora. And to this day, the only city which really observes Purim on a different day is Jerusalem. There are a couple of other cities that are not,
Mhm.
we're not sure, did they have a wall, did they not have a wall, and they do 2 days of Purim. That would be Tiberia, Hebron, Tzfat, Akko, um,
Okay.
Yafo, right? So all Lod is another one, right? There's a whole number of cities that keep 2 days of Purim. There's only one day, one city in the world that keeps its own separate day of Purim, and that city is Yerushalayim. So the argument is that, and he makes a very interesting argument about this. And he suggests that the 2 days of Purim was actually rejected by the rabbis of Israel. This is Yoel bin Nun's argument that 2 days of Purim is rejected by the rabbis of Israel, and the rabbis of Israel sort of set up their own separate kind of reality. And Yoel bin Nun's philosophy, it's very interesting. Um, he looks at one thing which I think we just never notice. We never really totally get this, but it is very, very clear in the Megillah and it is repeated over and over again. We all are familiar a little bit with the stories of the Nazis who had to reroute a ship to get one Jew on one Greek island, right? There's such stories out there, and there's the Wannsee conference where they had to figure out with all of the German advantages of trains and lists and documentation and very capable bureaucracies, right? It was still a lot of work to figure out how to exterminate all the Jews in one day. It wasn't one day, right? They had a long, drawn-out operation on how to do this. It involved Rahman al-Islam. It's a horrible thing. It's a terrible scenario, but it's just by comparison we sort of understand that extermination it's just hard to do it in one day. But this is so. Um, this is the first one over here. This is the third chapter of the Megillah. I should have put the references here, right? Um, oh, sorry. This is the second one. V'nishloch svarim biyad haratzim al kol medinot hamelech lashmid lagrog labed et kol haYehudim minar v'ad zakem taf nashim biyom echad. Oops. Let me go back. Accordingly, written instructions were dispatched by couriers to all the king's provinces to destroy, massacre, and exterminate all the Jews, young and old, children and women, on a single day. They got one day to do this. On the 13th day of the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, and to plunder their possessions. Right? So you get one, there's hunting season. Jewish hunting season is open for one day. That is what Haman gains. Part of this one day could be very much the Persian, part of the Persian ideas of lottery and time and astrology. We'll get to that in a minute. But it's still only one day. And then, fascinatingly, the Jews only get the right to defend themselves for one day, right? To this effect, the king was permitted the Jews of every city to assemble and fight for their lives. If any people of the provinces attack them, they may destroy, massacre, and exterminate its armed force together with women and children, and plunder their possessions on a single day. In all the provinces of King Achshverosh, namely on the 13th day of the 12th month, that is the month of Adar. But again, it's one day. So Yoel bin Nun says, what's the difference between being able to protect yourself for one day and being able to protect yourself, period? That's the difference between living in the Golah, in exile, and living in the land of Israel. And so Israel, the idea of that you have sovereignty or some kind of sovereignty, some kind of organized living as Jews is the right to defend yourself all the time, not just on a single day. And part of this, the sort of the contrast of the Megillah is describing diaspora living. It is steeped in diaspora living, and therefore, Jews are begging for the right to defend themselves, and it's a big deal. It's a big miracle that you got one day, right? That's what you get. You get one day to defend yourself, and then if you ask really nicely again, you'll get a second day to defend yourself. But after that, the right seems to disappear, right? The Jews are not allowed to be armed protectors of themselves. And so I think as a part of this same sort of idea of sort of exploring the Megillah, Yoel bin Nun likes to say that once there was a state of Israel, you no longer had an exile. You had a diaspora. And diasporas are different than exiles. In an exile, you're always fighting for your life. And in a diaspora, especially in the diaspora of the West, we here in Canada are full-fledged citizens of Canada. We're protected by every right that, or at least in principle, we're protected by every right that the government um, gives to its citizens. Now, we can argue, is that enough? Is it not enough? Do they doing enough to protect the Jews? Fair enough. That I'm not taking away from those arguments. I'm only going to say to you that the argument is that still we get protection like other citizens. And if you went back to France in 1130, that wasn't the case, right? It was a very different situation. Same in the United States, same in England, same in France, Hungary, etc. Right? All these places are going to give their Jews citizenship, and they can be Hungarian, and they can be Canadian, and they can be American, they can be French, they can be English, right? They occupy organic places in each one of those, but they still um, it's still different than being able to protect yourself in the land of Israel. And so you see sort of this duality that's going on. These 2 days is really reflective of this idea that there's Israel and diaspora, and the Megillah is about how Jews in diaspora live a secret existence. The Marranos loved the Book of Esther because they saw Esther as their prototype, because Esther was the hidden Jew, right? And so this is a book really about Jews hiding themselves, right? Again, we reference back to the fact that Mordechai and Esther are both very Goyish names, right? Through the Megillah, they become kosher names, they become Jewish names, but they are Babylonian deities, right? They're fertility and war. These are names that are not Jewish, and so these Jews are incredibly assimilated, and they are, in fact, the heroine of the story is married to a non-Jew. This is when you read this with the knowledge that there is a Jewish community in Israel that is not even mentioned, you start to understand that the Megillah is a book that is about how difficult it is to survive in the diaspora. How the diaspora mentality is entirely different. Now, I want to just show you sort of an interesting thing about this whole piece, just a piece of background. So this is Zoroastrianism has essentially two deities, right? There's Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu. Ahura
Oh,
Mazda
wonderful.
is the creator. Mainyu is the force of destruction, the dark force, the devil, right? The forces of, one is the force of light, one is the force of darkness. That's how Zoroastrianism works. How it explains evil in the world, how it explains chaos, etc. And this is important because the name of the holiday is Purim. And Haman is very invested. He's trying to figure out what is the one day he should pick. And he pilpur hu hagoral. He takes the poor, he takes um, um, this lottery, which is the goral. Goral is used in the Torah. Does anybody know where goral is used in the Torah?
Mm. Somewhere where it says Goral Echad Lahem, but I can't remember exactly
Goral
where.
echad laHashem, goral echad la'Azazel.
Yeah, that's the one.
Right? Where is that
Mm.
from?
I can't remember.
Okay. So that is from the law from Yom Kippur, right?
Ah, yeah.
Right? So that is from Yom Kippur.
Lechaper, yes. Yeah.
Right. So there's a scapegoat. One's a scapegoat, one is the sin offering. And so but you have to choose. That's chosen through the goral. So the poor, this lot is the goral. Goral is, by the way, also used to choose the places in where each tribe would get in the land of Israel. But so Haman engages in this lottery because let's assume for the moment he is using some Zoroastrian astrology technique and pulling out a lottery, right? And he decides this is the day I'm going to kill all the Jews. This is the day I'm going to hang Mordechai on the tree, right? So I'm going to ask you, evaluate Haman's scientific method.
Yeah,
Was it accurate or inaccurate?
well, he consults with all the known powers of the day, which day to choose, and that was the
Okay,
day
but
that
in
he
the end
chose.
of the day, did Haman choose well or not?
In terms of which specific day?
Haman chose a day because he wanted to destroy all the
Yeah.
Jews. He wanted to get the most efficient, most effective day. So he
Oh,
chose the 13th of Adar. Did he choose well from his perspective?
well, it's a month before Pesach.
Yes,
Yes. Who said yes?
Sam.
Why did you say yes, he chose well?
I think he replied to my Pesach. I said, because it's a month before Pesach.
Uh, this is obvious. At the end of the story, Haman and his 10 sons are strung up by their necks, and the Jews win. It was a horrible day, right? The
Well,
lot that he picks is completely, it's useless. It's worse than useless.
well, he didn't count on Esther turning the whole pile upside down.
Well, isn't that the point of astrology? To see the
Well,
things you can't see?
I'm not an expert in astrology. Obviously, the people he consulted with were not big experts either.
But they may have been big. So I look, the 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 what the Megillah likes to say, "V'na'afochu," and it turned around that the Megillah, it is a turnaround. What is um what is what is very interesting here is in the Persian theology, you have one God who operates in the good and the other one who operates in the darkness. And here you have it demonstrates that Hashem operates also in the darkness, right? That this Goral, it does cause destruction. It does cause upheaval. It does cause turn things around. But it turns out that the forces of evil were the ones that were turned around, right? That Haman himself was done. So it's a sort of a way of saying that the hand of God is more powerful than the Persian theology. But this idea, by the way, of Goral and um, the Goral in the temple and the Goral um, in the Purim story, that there is this twinning, right, of the temple and what's happening in the diaspora. Because sort of we're seeing there's sort of two stories. There's the story of the Jews of Israel and the story of the Jews of diaspora. And so this is a fascinating parallel. You'll see that the Esther is exact opposite of the high priest in all different ways. First of all, the story of the Megillah loves to tell us about the Chatzer HaPninimit and the Chatzer HaChitzonit, right? And to go into the outer courtyard and the inner courtyard, and to be able to get into the inner courtyard, you can't go in unless you're called by name, right? And you could die if you're not actually invited in. And what happens, by the way, in the temple, if you're not worthy of going in, the Kohen Gadol also dies, right? Just like the temple on Yom Kippur, where the Kohen Gadol will enter twice on Yom Kippur, so Esther also enters twice to the king's chambers. Um,
Mhm.
I will get back to those two entrances. I'm just going in the order of my bullets, but really, they're maybe a little out of order. When she goes in, she's wearing bigdei malchut, vatilbash Esther malchut, and Esther donned the clothes of royalty. And so this is sort of a game of farce. This is a game of masks. This is a game of not showing who you really are, right? But the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, he wears a simple white garment, right? He goes in as simple as can be, right? He is himself before the King of Kings, not putting on any masks, right? The Kohen, by the way, the first time he goes into the Holy of Holies, he lights a fire pan with the ketoret, with this incense mixture, to sort of so he doesn't look directly at Hashem, right? God's presence, right? And so the first, you could say, sort of the first entrance of the Kohen Gadol is for an obscuring event. When Esther first goes into Achashverosh's court, she's going to ask for a meeting with Haman, which is itself an obscuring event, because what Esther is doing is creating a sort of a scenario where the king is jealous of Haman for Esther's affection, and Haman is ultimately killed because he tries to conquer the queen with the king in his house. That what that conquer means, whether it's sexual, whether it's violent, whether it's just exterminate. I'll leave that to your imagination and debate. But clearly, Esther's first invitation there is to create a bit of confusion. The second time she enters is not the second party. The second time she enters is when she has to go to Achashverosh to ask for a second day to allow them to fight an extra day. And she goes there in order to save her people. Just like the Kohen Gadol who prays on behalf of all of his people. The other difference between Esther and the Kohen Gadol, of course, the Kohen Gadol can only be a man, and Esther is a woman. But you're going to see this parallelism between temple, right? The temple is not mentioned, but it's very much alluded to, right, in all of this. And it's sort of interesting. When you go to the temple, there's a whole purification ritual, right? What's the procedure for going to the king?
6 months in the spa.
But ridiculous months, right? 6 months in a perfume bath, right? Like I'm not sure what the last 22 weeks do for you, or the last 20 weeks do for you after the first two, right? You see, there's certain ridiculousness to the court of Achashverosh as compared to the temple. And so what I would say again is the takeaway from this book. This book is a way of being a bit of an implicit criticism of the um, diaspora community. And I'll sort of close with this. When Mordechai tells Esther, "You have to go in to speak to the king," he says, "Revach v'hatzala yavomi makom acher." Rescue and salvation will come from somewhere else. What do you mean come from somewhere else? You mean, Mordechai, God will rescue his people, but he doesn't say God, right? It is the book, the conversation, even between the heroes, is so neutered of religious language that you can say Makom means God, right? But it's stripped out. When Esther she says we're gonna fast for 3 days. There's not a word about the tefillah. So all of the things that Jews are used to, they're used to books of the Bible talking about connecting with God. The book of Esther is perhaps a portrait of what Judaism looks like when you subject it to living in the diaspora. You might even say that this book is the criticism that is going to be articulated by those who are living in the land of Israel, drawing a caricature of the people living in the diaspora. Because ultimately, there's sort of an idea in the Talmud that says, Kol shemid shadar b'chutz la'aretz ki'ilu oved avodah zarah. Anybody who lives in the diaspora, it's as if they worship idols. Now, you have to obviously take this with a grain of salt because there clearly are many very devout people who lived in the diaspora. But there is a sense that the Jew outside of Israel is a fish out of water. That ultimately, what will happen to the Jews in diaspora? They will become Mordechais and Esthers. Even the heroes among them will be intermarried. I know it's a very harsh thing to say, right? Because we want to walk away thinking Esther's the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I'm not here to I think she was a remarkable hero for the Jewish people, but you can't escape the fact that she is lost to the Jewish people in this story. I think that you have to be able to sort of contemplate what that's going to mean. Yes, Annie.
So if we ascribe the whole miracle of Purim, even though Hashem is not even mentioned in the Megillah, if we ascribe it to Hashem anyway, because doing it from behind the scenes and so on and so on. So what can we conclude of the fact that he's helping a very similar Jew who intermarried, and he creates success in her actions to save all the Jews. So should we conclude that we don't know the mystery that how God acts, and here it is. That's what he chose her, and assimilated a Jewish woman who married the goy to save the Jews. That's actually I shouldn't say positive thing, but that's the fact. That's almost
Well, yeah, so I mean, to in her defense, she was forcibly taken into the king's harem, and so maybe there's no choice there. I think you're right that basically God is saying that um, that there is that you're asked to look behind the scenes for the hand of God, and that this is a book which does represent a miracle. But sort of, I think the odd piece of this is that the Jews, very little changes for the Jews in this. They survive, and that's wonderful. But I think you're sort of left with sort of you know um, uh, a dead end, a bridge to nowhere. The Megillah doesn't take you anywhere. Especially when you think about the fact that this is at the same time of Ezra and Nehemiah and the attempt to rebuild the temple. So I think obviously people have venerated Mordechai and Esther, and we celebrate Purim, but I think that there is something about Purim which, again, has a criticism of those who are not going to be living in Jerusalem. And again,
and
it's written in the context of obviously the watchful eye of the Persian editors.
yet many people in Persia convert to Judaism. Ityahadu.
Right, Rabim me'amei haaretz mityadim.
Hmm.
Right, ki nafal pachad Mordechai aleihem, because the fear of Mordechai fell upon them. Okay,
Interesting.
Tov. This is installment number 2, and please God, we'll have an opportunity to do installment number 3 next week.
Thank you.
Rabbi, that was good.
Everybody have a great night.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks, Rabbi.